And thanks, folks. Welcome. And don't let me or let Brett get away with that, because sitting alongside me here and in amongst the crowd are some people that have a story or two to tell about DC3s as well. If you'll indulge me, I thought what I'd do is kick it off as to how I actually got to fly this aeroplane through from school age and through the Air Force, and then coming back to it. I flew the aeroplane in the Air Force and then came back to this 1999. So I'm sort of counting the best part of 25 years history with the aeroplane, but that doesn't add up to hours, it adds up to years more than anything. So if you'll bear with me, I went through my Air Force logbook, but first of all, when I left high school at the tender age of 16, I went off into the Air Force as tentatively an airframe mechanic. And that was only because I wasn't old enough to fly. At that stage, you had to be 17 and a half or 18 to go and do a wings course with the Air Force. And I found out from my dad, who worked from Bell Block Airport at the time with Rural Aviation, the top dressing company, that about 90% of the top dressing pilots had a secondary occupation. So the story was, when they couldn't top dress, there were electricians, there were plumbers, there were school teachers, there were cabinet makers. They all had something else to do when the flying wasn't on. So the story was, for me, was that I would go and do a trade, and at some stage I'd make an application to do a wings course. So I went off to, believe it or not, I flew out of Bell Block Airport in a DC-3 to Wellington, and then across the ditch to Woodburn in a DC-3. So it was a good introduction to the aeroplane. From completing my airframe training, I did a few years over here at Hobsonville on the helicopter squadron when they're all brand new, almost all brand new anyway, less than 12 months old. And then I went back and did my fitters course, which is advanced training for the trade, and came back to Whenuapai into the skin bay in the aircraft maintenance squadron there. And I spent, I think it was about 15 months, and I put in an application for a wings course. The response came back and said, "You're on the pre-selection," so away I went, and over at Hobsonville, we went through this gymnastics of pilot selection, and I can tell you it was arduous to say the least, and flying the old procedure trainer thing back then, where it was keeping a ball in the middle and using the throttle supposedly to put lights on and off. Well, I got word back and said, "We want you to be a navigator." I said, "Bugger that, I want to be up front, not back shooting stars." So I went off to Wigram on a pilot attitude application type test, and I flew the air tour down there for about 5 or 6 hours, and came back to my job here at Whenuapai, and a few weeks later they said, "You can go to Wigram in September 1972. So off I went. I did 3 months of officer training, and I did have a distinct advantage, because I'll tell you for why. I'd already been through the rigmarole of polishing bloody boots, spit polishing and polishing brass and all those sorts of things, you know, no railway tracks down your sleeves. And I actually, when I went to Wigram, I lived off base. I was married at the time, so I didn't have the arduous lifestyle that the guys had, but we had a good rapport, small wings course, 8 of us. So we did three months officer training, and then off into the Harvard. And I can look around the office of the room here, and I know there's more than a few of you know how the Harvard works and what it does and how it flies. No comments, Brett. So I look back in my Air Force logbook, and this will be interesting, Brett, too. This will ring a bell for you. We did about 150 hours on the Harvard, and then we did about 80 hours on that gorgeous British piece of wreckage, the de Havilland Devon. And at the end of wings course, I'd done about 257 hours. I got a preferential posting to 42 Squadron, who fly Dakotas. So off I went to Ohakia, and I was just telling Brett, less than 3 weeks after I started at Ohakia, I did the ground course, I did my total dual to the first bit of initial training was 7.3 hours in the Dakota. Okay, the RAF called them a Dakota, and the Air Force here adopted it. So after 7.3 hours, they actually sent me off what they call solo, as did most pilots down there. So what they did, they threw you in the left-hand seat and put another pilot, and sometimes a navigator as your co-pilot, and you went out and did 2 or 3 circuits after 7.5 hours on the aeroplane. So that was the story. The conversion course went on, and there was all sorts of other sorts of training. There was night conversion, there was TAC, which is dropping packs and stuff like that. We did night NavXs, 2 brand new pilots together. We would go off together, 2 pilot officers in a DC3 at night, going up and down the country. And power conversion as well. We did lots of VIP flying with, and I remember distinctly one trip where we flew across from Woodburn to Wellington with the boss of the squadron and I. We had the whole of the Defence Force chiefs on board the aeroplane. And 22 miles of water across there, we said, God damn, we'd be in big trouble if we don't get them all together on the other side. Seriously, Minister of Defence, Chief of Air Staff, Chief of General Staff, and Chief of Naval Staff. And I mean, that's the whole of the armed forces wiped out if we'd not got them to the other side. Shortly after, this all happened very quickly too. So in early December, and this is only after 2 months on the aeroplane, we went off to Norfolk Island on an oceanic trainer. A little bit, 3 weeks after that, we went Whenuapai, Tonga, Nasuri, Whenuapai. And bear in mind that the Air Force aeroplanes, 2 of them, had long-range tanks in them. So where these things have got about, in round numbers, 680 gallons with the main tanks and ox tanks, the Air Force ones had nearly 900 gallons. So there were 2 of them. So we'd go rock hopping around the Pacific and across to Australia as well. So we'd get across to, I can remember being in East Sale, I can remember being in Richmond, Canberra. So, it was a versatile aeroplane back with the Air Force, there's no question about that. And with some of the parachuting that we did, there was no such thing as wearing oxygen and stuff like that. So here we are out of Whenuapai over there, and the 2 paradacks were bare, steel panniers, no lining, cold as bloody charity, up at 16,000 feet, bombing grunts on a freefall. So, it was a marvellous introduction, to the aeroplane itself. And one of the other things that we did was, and some of this will not surprise you and some of it will, we did drogue towing with the Navy. And it just so happened the aeroplane that was fitted for the drogue operation was none other than Dakota 46. The aeroplane over there. Not Air Force One, but in the same livery. It had a special tail cone on it, and it had an astrodome fitted on the rear freight door as well, and it had provision for a big winch to be mounted in the back of the aeroplane. So we would go off in this aeroplane and into different parts of the country, mainly out here to start with. The D9 and 10 used to be danger areas out here in the Wongaparoa area, and then up in the Hokianga Harbour. And we would go up, let a big long steel cable out the back of the aeroplane, 6,000 feet of wire on a long tow, 1,200 feet on a short tow, and run a windsock down the wire. And then we would fly up and down and round and round, and the Navy would fire ack at us. Can you imagine it? And we wore parachutes. And the interesting thing was, when they actually deployed the drogue, the brake on the wire was just a block of wood. And there's this big strong armourer down the back there holding this block of wood on the wire to stop it running out too quickly. Otherwise it would have gone off the drum and we'd have lost it. And of course, you know what happens when you put wood on a wire cable at speed, don't you? chokes, blue smoke going everywhere. And the worst thing you could do was to open the cockpit window, because it then created a vacuum and suck it all forward. So, and I can tell you I had one instance with the Lachlan, dear old Lachlan, HMNZS Lachlan up at the Hoki Hangar, actually hit the drogue. And it just about snapped the aeroplane in half, the pitch up. Because you imagine this windsock was about, I think from memory, about 12 feet long and quite big in diameter. And a direct hit on it, the aeroplane pitched up, and we all thought, oh, this is the end of this. But we got away with it. And the other thing was, of course, the approval to fire on the drogue was at the discretion of the radar operator on the boat. They had to have a positive lock-on the drogue. It had a radar reflector in it, and they were not allowed to open fire without confirmation that they were locked onto the drogue, because you imagine the gun would track up the cable, and guess what they're firing at next? So that was part of that with the drogue tow. Another really great achievement that we had on 42 Squadron with the DC3, and it broke a lot of, am I allowed to call them? No knuckleheads in here today? No, you can tell them because they've got fork holes in their foreheads, okay? Fighter pilots we're talking about. The base commander at Hangar, Group Captain McIntyre, put up a trophy for the squadrons there. So there was 14 squadron flying Strike Masters, 75 flying A4 Skyhawks, and dear old 42 squadron flying Dakotas. And the exercise was a timed navigation round a route, and then come back where the Nucks would go and throw a bomb at the range at Raumai off the coast there at Hangar, or just south of Wanganui, and we would throw a pack. So away we went, 2 DC3s, and I don't know how many Skyhawks, but it's half the squadron, and the Strike Masters. And you can imagine what happened at the end of the day, can't you? The truckies won the bloody trophy. And I can tell you, the base commander was not a very happy man, and neither were the Nucks. And the interesting thing was that they were doing low-level runs across Oahu Airfield and then pitching up into the range at Raumai, which is about 7 or 8 miles from the airfield. And one of them overcooked it, and when he bunted and pickled, the bomb they couldn't plot. It went about 3 miles off the coast. Didn't go anywhere near the range. So, let's leave that there with 42 Squadron, but you can see I left the squadron after 2.5 years with just a little over or just a little under 1,100 hours on top. And interestingly enough, I mean this was a real comparison about the operation back there in those days, was nearly half of it was in the left-hand seat as a captain. So, you know, in the 12 years as a pilot officer, next year to flying officer, it was there was a lot of flying in the left-hand seat for us young guys, which, you know, was pretty decent grounding, especially, you know, being in the left-hand seat so early. And I did quite a lot of flying with my contemporaries. 2 of us got posted to 42 Squadron off wing schools, and we did quite a lot of flying together, up and down the country. 2 young bucks, less than 300 hours in the seat, you know, when we were away. So, and Ian will know about this, you know, he's did 10 months on time, I've heard, and Paul, I done 12 months, nearly 12 months. Jim Bergman, did you flew the DC-3?
Sorry, what's that?
Did you fly the DC-3?
About 2,000 hours.
There you go. See, so I've got to be careful what I say.
Mostly as co-pilot. This guy's there got all my...
Yeah. Okay.
I was talking
So,
flying.
let's get into the good old Goonie bird. Most of you will know, and Brett's made a bit of an introduction, but it was a brilliant aeroplane designed and built in 1935 and flew first on the 17th December by a guy by the name of Carl Cover, had the thrill of flying it. But prior to that, remember, the DC-1 was built some years earlier, and they only built one of them. And when it went on its test flight, they nearly lost it. And they subsequently found, when they got back on the ground, that the floats and the carburetors had been fitted upside down. So that when they pitched up, the floats closed. So, you know, imagine this was this push-pull, push-pull all the way around the circuit until they got the aeroplane safely back on the ground. But that was it. They never built another one, just one of them. The DC-2, they again didn't build very many. I think it was about 16 in total. And then, of course, along came Donald Douglas and the CEO of American Airlines and said, we want something to fly intercontinental, transcontinental, or across the CONUS in the States a lot more comfortably and a lot quicker than the current aircraft types that were available. Some of them were taking 5 days to go across the United States. So the DC-3 was introduced in 1935, and then of course along came the Second World War. And immediately what happened was the military stole all the commercial airline aeroplanes and converted them to C-47s. And from that day onwards, they were all out of the factory were C-47s of different varieties. So the Air Force called them a C-47, the Navy called them an R-4D, and the Super DC-3 was a 53, a C-53. So they were all very, very similar. In fact, the only difference between a DC-3 and a C-47 was that they then put the big freight door into the C-47. They also strengthened the floor because they knew that they were going to carry and shift a lot of equipment and people as well. And of course they had the tail cones and the rear fuselage was strengthened. And in fact our aeroplane, if you ever want to go and have a look at it, has got a double row of rivets around the rear fuselage. And we can categorically prove that that was actually one of the assembly line that was destined to be a drogue type. Never made it because it didn't come out of the factory till end of October 1944. So it didn't see any wartime service as such. From there it went to, it went into the United States Army Air Force in those days, and then across the Pacific up into Korea and Japan, and it migrated to and fro across up there for quite a period of time. And then in 1959 it was disbanded from the military and became Philippine Airlines flagship. And in fact flying the first international sector between Manila and Hong Kong. And interestingly enough, at a point so many years ago when we had the aeroplane pulled apart involuntarily because a civil aviation inspector walked in the door and said, this thing's been a top dresser, pull it apart. And so we did, but it never had an ounce of bloody superphosphate in it. The horizontal stabiliser, or the tailplane, when it came out and we separated it, we actually found PAL plates in there, Philippine Airlines, and it's still there today. So from there it moved on south, migrated to Papua New Guinea, and it spent some time there with NZ and some other airlines as well, and then finally across the Arafura Sea into Australia, and it flew there with Bush Pilot Airways, Air Queensland, and ended up in the museum at Mackay. About that time of the year, and that's why we're all here, NZ Warbirds was forming, 1987. And a good Australian friend of some of the Warbirds guys happened to notice a little cutting in a newspaper saying there's a DC-3 up for auction or tender at Mackay in Queensland. So a group of guys got together, and some of the foundation members are right here. And a bid was put in. Anybody like to hazard a guess? Just laugh a minute and think how much the guys put in a bid for to secure this DC-3, which had done about, back then, only about 41,000 hours. Anybody like to have a guess? What do you think the tender was?
$500.
How much?
$500.
Oh, come on. How about $73,200?
Yeah.
And at that stage, they got a team together, 20 members, and Paul's...
Worth a point, I don't think our bid was the highest. We were almost sure we were outbid, but because of what we wanted to do with it,
we got the benefit, yes, yeah. Thanks. And so the original members, it was secured, and then they think that they changed the tyre and the carburetor, and flew across the ditch back to New Zealand. In fact, it went to Christchurch. From there, it flew north to the Wairarapa, and it went into the hangar there at Masterton for, how would you put it, ascertaining its current status.
A repaint.
Well, that's what they thought, a repaint as well. But when they actually got into the aeroplane, they found that one of the wings needed some quite serious repairs. The syndicate went from 20, the only way they were going to salvage this aeroplane, or they were going to lose it overnight, was to increase the number in the syndicate. So it went out to 50. And nominally, that's what it stands at today, but we've sent quite a few up to the big hangar in the sky, and we've lost a few along the way that don't have any further contact with us, but are officially still owners of the aeroplane. So it's a syndicate-owned aeroplane, and operated now under air transport licence. The aeroplane, of course, when it came out of Masterton, was in the Rex Daniels colour scheme, the D-Day colours. Unfortunately, we didn't bring the other model, but we thought we'd better stay up to date. But it was painted in the D-Day colours with the black and white stripes in 1987, and it stood the test of time, although it got pretty scruffy. By the end of 2006, we said that's enough of that. And we put a feeler out round the syndicate as to what we thought should come, from the syndicate preferential voting of what the livery should go to. And at that point in time, we'd actually been doing some quite consolidated charter work with Air National at Auckland Airport. And they let us know in uncertain terms that aeroplane's bloody scruffy. It doesn't look very good on, with commercial passengers flying on what looks like a beat-up old wartime aeroplane. Well, it was. So the decision went round, and it was either that NAC livery, Air Force livery. And as coincidentally, when we did some surveying around and pricing and what have you, and checking on legalities of the livery itself, the ideal colour scheme was going to be NAC. But it turned out Air New Zealand didn't own it. True. Rob Mackley owns the legal rights to NAC, National Airways Corporation. Man down the hangar, just down the hangar here. So Rob Mackley owned National Airways Corporation. And so he said, yes, go ahead and paint it those colours if you want. But at that time, Air New Zealand had offered to strip the aeroplane and paint it for us. But when they found out it was going into NAC colours, they said, bugger you, Jack, you're out of here. So the idea was then that we went to the Chief of Air Staff at the time, and bless his cotton socks, he not only gave us the approval, but after some laborious search through records, he sent us all the true colour schemes exact. So we have all the documents over there to paint it exactly like it was in the Air Force, except that our aeroplane is a C-47B for D. When they Philippine Airlines took it over, they flew it back to the United States and converted it from a military configuration, so the big freight doors went, and they put in what they call an air-stair door, which makes the aeroplane self-sufficient when it's away. So we got it as a C-47D, D for door, or D for dog. Yep, D for D, D for D. The result of that is, of course, that we've had some reasonable activities here with the RNZAF. We've attended just about every air show since the aeroplane went into that livery. 2007 it was finished, March. And on top of that, we've done quite a bit of parachuting with Kiwi Blue. No static line in the aeroplane, it's all free fall. But I can tell you that the guys over there just love getting on board the old girl and clambering out and meat bombing, as we call it. The configuration inside is, it's got 30 seats, it's fully lined, fully carpeted. It's fitted with a entertainment system, if you can call it that. It's got the good old CD player. and a few speakers, and we play wartime music, as Jesse will tell you, a bit of Vera Lynn and that good stuff. So, how are we going here? What we need to get down to is really about flying the aeroplane. And I've got to be careful here, because like I say, there's some semi-experts here as well. How many of you are Taildragger pilots? Oh, that's a reasonable number. Yeah. I think those that have flown the Harvard will know what we're talking about when we say that there are those that have and those that are going to. Ground loop, a Taildragger. And it comes about, I guess, through using your feet in synchronisation of what the aeroplane's trying to do to you. Single engine Taildragger, and particularly the Harvard, is I wouldn't say altogether different proposition, but it's an altogether different proposition to flying a DC-3, because the difference is when the tail comes up with two engines, the critical engine on the DC-3 is on the left-hand side, and the down-going propeller blade is a nice big gyroscope, isn't it? So from having a little bit of right rudder when you line up on the runway and start the roll, when the bum comes up, if you don't get your left boot in, you are going to be heading one way or t'other. So it is a real fly-by-wire. And the other thing is that there's a critical device in the aeroplane which is a lifesaver. Excuse me. And these two will know, and Jim as well. What do you think keeps the aeroplane straight when we line up on the runway for takeoff? It's got a big aluminium pin that sits through the controls to the rudder, and it's connected to the flight deck by a cable. And it sits under the console, there's a little lever, and it's just a pull back, and then it goes into a notch, and you let it go. It will only engage if the airplane is pointed straight. If you're cocked off and you start a roll without the tail wheel lock engaged on this aeroplane, when you stand the throttles up and go, you are going to run off the runway, because there is no rudder effect till about 40 knots. And I, been there, done that once. And it was back with one of my other pilots off wings course while we were in the power deck at Whanuapai. Squadron commander was standing between the seats. And he was yelling and screaming and saying, "What the bloody hell are you doing?" This aeroplane's going like this. We managed to stop it before we ran off the runway. Those who have and those who are going to. So the tail wheel lock goes in for the takeoff, and it stays there until you're ready to vacate the runway after landing. And you can't generally take it out at too high a speed, or you'll get a tail wheel shimmy. Like this. Try and do it too fast. Getting airborne, we all know it's got 1830-92s, 1200 horsepower side. The numbers are pretty similar to for RPMs and boost settings that a lot of you will have had in the smaller radials. 48 inches of boost and 2700 RPM to go. And then we come back to, we get the tail up, we call V1, 74 knots. The critical speed is about 70.4 knots. So we go to 74 knots, and that way, if you have an engine failure, you can keep the aeroplane straight. And we don't rotate these days until we get 90 knots, which is single engine climbs. And that's another change from earlier days. Used to go at 80 something? Yeah. 86, I think we used that in the Air Force. 76, 84 I think we used. We use 90 so that we know when the aeroplane lifts off, we can keep it flying if we have an engine failure. And for those of us that have had this pleasure of flying this aeroplane, we all know that on one engine, it's not a startling performer. And to think, we fly these aeroplanes, and NAC did, as well, at 26,900 pounds, about 12,200 kilos for takeoff. In the Air Force, we did 29,000 pounds all the time. On overload, we went to 31,500. You imagine what that's like. It made my eyes water when I heard about it. I thought, and I did have one event, seriously, going off of all the airfields in the country at Waiouru, in a Paradak. And that's a very high elevation in there, and quite a short strip with a big ravine off the end. Guess what the load was in the aeroplane? Cartons of double brown. The army had been on exercise up there, and this was the leftover beers, right? So they opened the door on this Paradak, and they just kept shoving these cartons in the door. We were none the wiser until we put the power levers up and started to accelerate and said, shit, something's not right here. And there was no stopping because, trying to brake an aeroplane that was grossly overloaded, you know what the problem was, don't you? It was loaded in pounds and were actually kilos. So when we got back to Ahaki, in fact, to get airborne, we threw a quarter flap out, just barely cleared the fence, sucked the wheels up, and went down into the valley to get this thing to really gain some sort of airspeed. And thank God, Ahaki wasn't very far away, but it was hell to pay when we got back. So it does fly, and you can imagine in the war, they regularly flew at 31,000 pounds. And they lost a lot of aeroplanes, of course, with, running into terrain and stuff like that, as you would expect, because these engines weren't really renowned for, having great performance. And reliability was another issue, of course, and we've learnt that over the years, and we did in the military as well. That in the NAC days, they could do a quick engine change in about 5 hours. So if they lost an aeroplane on the line, they'd pull it away, and first thing in the morning, be back on the tarmac, ready to go again. We can't do that these days because the facilities aren't available. The performance otherwise is what we call low and slow. We love down where we can see the sheet and count the fence posts and those sorts of things. So we don't do any IFR flying these days on the assumption that people like to look out the window and see where we're going, what we're doing. But the other thing is that the performance, single engine performance, is limiting flying IFR because it's based around 99% of the time on the highest terrain. So you can imagine going even from here to Taupo or Napier, you might think there's not much terrain through there. Well, there is. So you've got to stop and look at the graph and say, well, single engine ceiling today is only 4,500 feet. That means we're going to run into cumulus granitus at some point in time if we lose an engine. So we fly all the time now VFR. And that doesn't mean that we don't go up, we do. But we do it on control VFR under radar. And of course we're looking around all the time when we're cross country at where can we go, where can we go, where can we go. And fortunately, because of its reasonable short field performance, we could just about take, like things like Matamata and stuff like that. Whitty is another grass airfield that we just love because it's the best airfield by choice. But there are a few others around that. Tamanui's, but Whitty is way longer as well. That's the advantage. And it's got a bloody good cafe there as well, Ian, you know that. Getting a vote in here for Cafe Koru. The operation that we're running, we're in conjunction with a tour company, Pacific Trailways. So we've done some really interesting flying with them in recent years, and more recently, what we call an East Coast tour. So we've taken a load, generally about 24, 26 passengers. We take our high-as van for the bags because we can't cope with that number of people and their bags for 5 days. And there's a coach, backup coach, goes by ground as well. We head off to Matamata. bomb into Hobbiton down there. Meanwhile, we launch and go to Rotorua. It's not bad landing at Matamata, but it's performance limiting getting airborne out of there again. So we send them off to Hobbiton, we bomb off to Rotorua, and they go by coach direct from there to Rotorua and meet us. Next morning, load up, and off we go, and we go out round White Island. Big sort of semicircle we fly there, because it's a long way around, believe it or not. It's about 43 miles off the coast. But to fly right around the perimeter, even in our aeroplane doing about 140 knots, is about at least 25 minutes. So we just go round the active part where the volcano is and back again, and then head off around East Cape down to Gisborne. And we do some really nice stuff along there. We pop off down to about 500 feet down the coast along there. And the interesting thing is, you can imagine, as we get round the corner at the lighthouse and then start coming south and get past Ruatoria, people are looking up saying, what the hell is going on with that military aeroplane up there? What are they looking for? The old wacky backy. Yeah, Maori Puha. So we cover that area generally at lower level, have a night in Gisborne, and then the next day just whistle down the coast to Napier. The people go off. In fact, on the last one we did Cape Kidnappers with them. So they have a day off there, and the next day north to Taupo, they go for a jet boat ride, and then we sit on the ground, wait for them to do that, and then whistle back here to Ardmore. So 5 days away with 24 people, and we've got another one coming up early next year, Jess, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And we've done three of those already. We've done some bigger tours around New Zealand, and we've had the indignity in particular of having had an engine throw a cylinder. When we got down to Manapuri, we actually gone all the way south, so we launched out of here, go southbound, right through most of the smaller airfields, but basically we're trying to avoid the big cities. So for example, we land at Ashburton instead of going to Christchurch. And then we did Timaru and down to Dunedin, and then from there we launched off to Manapuri. Well, we got airborne all, no problem at all, but while we were downwind at Manapuri, things started not sounding quite so comfortable on one side. So we landed and shut the aeroplane down, and the passengers went away, and then when we had a bit of peace and quiet so that nobody was looking too closely while we were investigating, we ran the engine again, and there was no indication, believe it or not. So the next morning we'd already advised the tour operator that we probably weren't going anywhere too soon. We got up and went out and ran the aeroplane again. No mistaking that things weren't good. And it took some serious investigation, because what had happened, we got the cows off with the assistance of the local engineer there, and had a good look around. He said, I think I found the trouble, and it was just in one particular area that he thought was not as it should be. But then when he had a further look around, he found in fact that the inlet manifold had actually ruptured, and we were very lucky that we hadn't had an engine fire. So the aeroplane sat in the cold there at Manapuri for days and days and days, and Jess and I spent some time down there organising. In fact, Jessie drove through to and fro to Queenstown to pick up a cylinder, and it was fitted down there by a field air engineer, came down to us, and we spent several days down there, got it back in here, and then meantime our passengers had gone on. So you do have these little oopsies, but you've got to expect that in an old aeroplane. It does, we've had other instances as well, and I don't want to harp on that, but at no time have we ever been concerned that we wouldn't get back to to a safe arrival somewhere. And that's what the whole operation's geared around about. Our motto is safety is prime. So we don't take any risks, don't push things, And at best times, for example, on a conversion course on an aeroplane, we don't do any fully developed stalls. And that's with CAA approval. What's the point of hammering an old aeroplane when you really should be able to identify that this is coming and do something about it before it happens? So on a conversion course with our guys, we still do gear down, full flat, but we only go to the buffer. Let's get the hell out of here. We don't want this thing. I've never done a fully developed stall in our aeroplane, so we don't know if it drops a wing. You do, Paul?
It doesn't really drop, it just mushes.
Mushes, exactly. So, and it gets back in the full flat landing configuration to about 53 knots before it starts to let you know, get out of here. So you can see we have good margins on our approaches here. Generally, we're sort of 90 knots round base, and depending on the weight and the conditions, but we're looking at about 80 knots to 75 knots across the wire and touching down. And the interesting thing with our aeroplane as well is that it's very, very tail heavy. For what reason, we don't know. The index is quite, it's heavier than we ever thought it was. Last time it was weighed, it went up again. The index is well back, so we've got to be very careful. If we put 28 or 30 passengers, adults, in the aeroplane, you guarantee it's going to go outside the aft index. So that's why now we limit the passengers, and we've got to be a bit circumspect as well about some of those that aren't 89 kilos. They don't get to sit in row 8. We have to move them around a bit. So it is sensitive in the plane, and in fact, whilst we're cruising around the countryside, with one hand on the control column and the other hand is constantly on the trim wheel. As soon as anybody moves, there's an instant trim change. And it doesn't take very much, especially if you get somebody from row 1 goes back to the loo at about row 13. There's only 8 rows, but they go right through the back end. You have to make a positive correction to stop it climbing. Same the other way, as soon as they come back again. So it is sensitive in the pitch. It's, as you can well imagine, it is real fly-by-wire. No hydraulics in this aeroplane except for the brakes, wipers and the undercarriage. So it's relatively, I don't know whether you call it heavy, but it needs positive movements with the controls. It's got huge ailerons on them. They're nearly 22 feet long, the ailerons. It's got 95 feet of wing and it's 65 feet long. So to roll the aeroplane is not that bad on the aileron control. It will roll quite quickly. And in the pitch, it's the same. It's got huge elevators and it's got a bloody big rudder. So the controls are, if you make the right sort of movements at the right time, everything stays hunky-dory. But you can get out of kilter, and I've seen it several times, and I'm not mentioning any names. If, the wrong foot goes in at the wrong time, these big aeroplanes get away, and Liz will tell you, in the harbour. Hey, I'm not pointing the finger at you, but with your experience, you'll know that people that have ground looped the harbour just haven't got their feet on the job quick enough.
Everybody ballet shoes on.
Or your slippers. Yeah. So, folks, anybody got any questions?
Do you three-pointed or wheel it? You wheel it here, but did they in the past? Did they three-pointed?
Yeah, of course they did. But it depends largely on this index. Our aeroplane, if it's empty at the air shows, and you're quick enough, I've three-pointed it, enough times to know. But you've got to be onto it. It takes quite a substantial elevated movement to arrest it and get the tail down. But apart from that, we do what we call tail down wheelers. And it's much, much easier. If you screw up a three-pointer, everybody on board's going to let you know about it, and so is Facebook. So, your pride is dependent roughly on getting this aeroplane on the ground, and we do encourage guys to close the throttles as well. You know, you're chewing up airfield. If you're fiddling, just trying to get a squeaker, we encourage guys to close the throttles. And if the aeroplane's in trim, it's a tail down wheeler. One of the things we have with this aeroplane too, unlike a lot of lighties, if it bounces, we don't check forward. Otherwise, the pitch change is intense. So, you know, we 90% of the time get away. It's only really that we have a serious landing where we've got to stick the levers up and get out of there. And it's pride that does it, really, I guess.
In the Air Force, were they 3-pointing as well, or was it or wheeling most of the time in your Air Force days?
We did whatever we got, but the airplanes were a lot lighter. There was a huge difference between the Paradox, for example, which were gutted, the two of them. Nothing inside except a wire and steel panniers, so they were light as. You can imagine Queen Lizzie's VIP aeroplane, which is all tongue and groove and beautiful timber, only got 8 seats in it, is as heavy as. But interestingly enough, we used it more for conversion training than we did the other online aeroplanes, and it was because they didn't get as much use. So 53 and 51, and 51 you'll know is in the museum at Christchurch at Wigram, and 53 was the semi-VIP aeroplane, was still very nice inside, but had a few more seats in it, and the long-range tanks. So that did get used for offshore stuff, especially for navigation training. And it had the astrodome as well, as did 51 and 46, but that was on the side door, so the armourer could look out and see that the drogue was going down the wire. Yeah. You'll all know that Brent flies a Harvard here, 65, and on my little piece of paper here, I did see Ace Edwards isn't here, unfortunately, but Ace has got 98. Going back to my Harvard days now, I did my first solo in 98 in November 1972, and I next flew 65, 3 days later. So it'll be 50th anniversary for me this year. I'm flying the Harvard, solo that is, so I'm going to bend these guys' arm to line these two aeroplanes up out here and go and have a fly. And we'll see what happens. Yeah. So with that, folks, unless anybody's got anything other seriously, the thing I really would like to impress upon you is that flying this aeroplane, I think, is a real privilege. I, like I say, I did 2.5 years off in the Air Force, and I just happened to be in the simulator on a detail in the 767 with, bless his heart, Bob Tarr. And he said to me, he said, "You used to fly DC-3s in the Air Force, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, a little bit." I said, "We got a job for you." So I came out here to Ardmore, and Bob and I got in this aeroplane back when it was in its, this is late 98 I think it was. It was in its D-Day colours, and we went flying in this aeroplane. And I was absolutely embarrassed because after about 45 minutes he said, "You've not forgotten a thing, especially about the numbers." And I have to confess, numbers stick with me. And we put the aeroplane back on the ground. He said, "Do you want a job?" So there I was, and I'm still there today. And interestingly enough, Jessie came along. I used to, on the Scenics, before she joined the syndicate, I'd fly deliberately all around her business up on the North Shore and sometimes sneak up a bit to home as well. And she'd be out on the back lawn or on the terrace with a tea towel, like Mum used to be in the Air Force. And we've been in the syndicate together now for that time. And I'm sure the good times, Jessie will back this up, and Leslie as well back there will back this up, that the good times far outweigh the bad ones, don't they? Yep. And we don't know how much longer, and let's not get too sorrowful about this, but we don't know how much longer we can continue to operate the aeroplane purely on the basis that all you aviators will know that avgas now is, it's out of control, stupid. And for us, when we're burning 400 litres an hour, they put it up. Yeah. And I mean, we've had to stick $350 an hour on the last increase, just for fuel. So that's the challenges we face. Landing here, FIF here at Ardmore, have a guess how much? Nearly $160. Our landing. It's dearer than Auckland International Airport. Yeah. We just, and the other day, and we get no concession for training either. So, no, none at all. So we've got a bill sitting there at the moment for $960 or something for 5 landings. The other thing we find now with the aircraft around the country is that you'll all know that, or predominantly most of you will know now that the airfields are council owned, majority of them. And they think it's a cash cow. And what happens is, from the good old days when the airport manager would have the major say in what the landing fees were, and it was not based on aircraft weight, they were fair and reasonable. Now it's out of control, ridiculous. And for example, at Queenstown, we won't go to the South Island that far anymore, just purely and Wanaka, on the grounds that the airport authority down there charged $350 plus GST to land. You've got to be in there before 10 o'clock in the morning and get away after 3:30 in the afternoon. The overnight parking fee is $500 plus GST. And you have to have a ground handling agent. What the hell for? We're self-sufficient. No, you've got to have somebody to escort you across the tarmac. You've got to have somebody open the gates. And it's all a cash cow. So we don't know too much about Wanaka, although what we're trying to do now is say that we're going to limit our coverage to the top end of the South Island, just purely at this time too, when a dreaded bug is interfering with a lot of things, is that we don't want to get way down the South Island and have something happen that strands us. So we're going to look at Omagh is our airfield of choice, or airshow of choice anyway, and across to Nelson, and perhaps we might push it into Canterbury. But I doubt, not in my time anyway, I don't think we'll ever get beyond that unless there's some significant incentive to go and do it. It's crazy, yep. The other aeroplane that's in Auckland here, Air Chatham's, is you will all know as ex-top dresser AWP, ex-NAC, ex-Air Force, is currently based, or it spends its summertime in Tauranga, doing scenics down there. We were in Tauranga just the other day, in fact, with the North Shore Aero Club, did a charter down there with us. They went down for lunch and came home again. And AWP was parked on the grass down there. Well, they've put the covers on, and it probably won't fly again for 5 or 6 months, unless it has to come back for maintenance or something like that. So they're in the same boat. You know, the cost of operating these aeroplanes, and that aeroplane is considered Craig Emeny's toy, and its costings absorbed by Air Chatham's, of course, where we're putting hand in cap and saying, can you help us out? So they don't worry too much about what the maintenance costs are. And to give you some heads up on what the costings are, our last engine change, we had to do it at Whittianga. It's again a cylinder let us down. We went away offshore to get the engine, and by the time we got it back in the country and on the aeroplane was the guts of $200,000. No different today. You know, it's that sort of money. And the worst thing about it is the shipping. It takes forever. And every man and his dog's got their hand out. The customs handling agent wants a slice of the goods. GST, the government wants their bit. And it just goes on and on and on. So, you know, we've suffered the indignity of the aeroplane it's no secret, has been on the ground. We put it into Palmerston. This is another issue. In October last year, a piece of metal about the size of my top of my thumb there was found in an engine that we had only done, the one that was fitted at Hangar, done 71 hours. And when they drained the oil from the engine sump, they heard a clunk in the bucket. And they said, that's not very good. So they drained the bucket and they found this. I've got the piece of metal's over there in the hangar, about that size. And it turned out, once they got the engine specialist back into field air, who'd long retired, that he came and had a look and took one look and said, oh shit, he said, that's a showstopper. It was a tag of a bearing retaining ring in the forward section inside the bell housing. There are 4 of them. And they suspect that during the overhaul, the fitting that this tab went into had been retreated. And what happens, of course, with the retreating, it goes slightly oversized, or it reduces the diameter of where this, and they think some big cahoot over there with a hammer went to make this tab fit. And it clearly didn't break off at that time, but it cracked it. So there it was in the bucket with the oil. The engine came off, and eventually about 2 months later, we had to go searching the world, of course, to find a replacement. It eventually came off, and then we went through the handsprings of getting it in a cradle, in a crate, and up to the USA. And the interesting thing was, it's all designed to try and stump you, really. We went to put it in the container. It was about that much too high. And they had to get Air Chatham's, bless their socks, it was already in the crate on a proper engine stand with 4 casters. Air Chatham's came out with a gas axe and went and cut the 4 wheels off. So it fitted in the crate. And on board, we air flew it, air freight, because shipping at the moment could take 3 months, as Brendan Deer's going to find out with his Avenger. So, and it was not a lot of difference in price. And from the time it left Auckland, easy freight, it was in destination at Taildragger in California inside 5 days. But then the next issue started. The wheels fell off again because the company we bought the engine off didn't do the overhaul. It was done by Vintage Radials. Sunnier Parts sold us the engine. Now, Sunnier Parts goes 100-hour warranty. Vintage Radials said, no, it's only 50. We'd done 71 hours. So the fight started. But we won because the sales invoice was quite clear, printed with a 100-hour warranty. So Sunnier Parts agreed to supply the parts, gaskets and seals and stuff like that, and Vintage Radials would do the repair work. And so it happened, and eventually we got this thing back on the aeroplane. Well, when we were at Palmerston to pick it up and fly it home, Andrew Lynn, the chief engineer at Field Air, came out and gave me a cardboard box. Said, oh, you better take these, you might need them. And inside were about 5 or 6 gaskets and various other bits that we were required to refit the bell housing and seal it. The prices on them would make you just absolutely weep. There was about $4,500 US in these few seals that were in gaskets that were in there. One of them was $950 US for a tiny little thing. So that's the sort of issue that you're up against here now. So have some regard for poor old Brendan down at Biggin Hill at Ohakea there with Plonky, and we all know that at the last time he was at the air show up here, open day, that Plonky dropped a cylinder and they fixed it and got it back in the air, and we all suspect, I think it's pretty obvious that something like that's happened again. And he's tucked the wings up, put it in the corner of the hangar, and probably it won't fly for 9 months, maybe a year, because his priority now is on the P-51. So there we go. So there are 2 DC-3s, C-47s. They didn't make very many DC3s. They were C-47s. And you can argue all you like, but the facts are they're C-47s. There's two of them, and there's another one at Wanaka, which flew around the world in 2012. And Escapade, which was the Gene Batten reenactment flight. And that aeroplane is currently under maintenance at Wanaka, and who knows whether it's going to fly again or not. It's fitted with only 19 seats, quite big lazy boy Rocketeer type configuration. But only time will tell, because the South Island is not a very good place for a DC-3, particularly in the winter. And I'm talking about the southern regions, you know, and the owner has got the lodge at Taildragger. So, and there's no hangarage down there at all. So you don't want a DC-3 sitting at especially Manapuri, and more so probably at Wanaka as well, because the only hangar there is the Warbirds hangar, which is now a maintenance depot. So there's three in New Zealand, and at last report, around about 166 that are still turnkey starters around the world. And most of them with preservation societies, as you can well understand. Beer o'clock?
Beer o'clock.
Sauvignon Blanc o'clock?
Any more questions? Any questions?
Geoff, have you had a chance to fly the single pilot DC-3 like NZ Warbirds did for the top dressing?
No. Now it's interesting you should raise that, Ian, because I just got his book.
Oh, good.
He's published a very, very interesting exercise, and I'm not sure that what they were doing was very good for a DC-3, because in my early days at the Air Force, I used to watch Don Thorpe at Woodburn getting airborne in his DC-3 down there, and merely just getting the wheels up as he crossed the fence. I thought, what the hell are these people doing with that aeroplane? And he used to fly a Fiat Bambino round in the back of his aeroplane too, as his ground transport. Serious, yeah. He had ramps. I mean, that's how they loaded them in the military as well. Jeeps and all that went just up on ramps and they drive them in. He had a Fiat Bambino. Well, eventually, and it's sad to say, he was renowned for breaking wing bolts. Every night after he came home, the engineers would propose there's 365 bolts around the wing fillets. They would replace broken bolts. And eventually, the man up top caught up with them. The wing came off, and the aeroplane was destroyed, of course. So, and the top dressers, we got caught at Hamilton some years ago, like I say, the civil aviation, the aeroplane was there on inspection, and an engineer by the name of, I hate using this name because it's Jesse's maiden name, Alan Nicholson, walked in the door and said, pull it apart. And there were about 12 or 14 of us down there in overalls from the syndicate, sleeping in the Mystery Creek Hilton, just up the road there. And he's emphasised his words, pull it apart. And, he was enlightened in no uncertain terms that the aeroplane had never been a top dresser, ever. Doesn't matter, he said, you heard me, pull it apart. And we were just about to undertake a big air show at Taupo, Wings and Wheels or something like that it was called. Cost us a fortune. The only saviour again was that the syndicate manpower did about 95% of the work, but everything came off. The wings came off, the rudder came off, the fin came off, the horizontal stabiliser came off. Pull it apart, and we did. So we're rather glad. And when you talk about the top dresser, of course, most of you will probably understand that single pilot, and I just had a quick squiz at Neil's wording the other day, and he did only about 3 or 4 hours dual before they let him loose in the top dresser. But he was already a top dressing pilot, but they had a special extended handle on the undercarriage and the flaps. They didn't have anybody in the right-hand seat. So any of you that have sat up fronted or had a look, you'll understand that the flap lever's the top one on the firewall behind the first officer, and the lever underneath is the landing gear. And you've got to be very careful about which one you move first and last in the sequence, before landing and after takeoff. They fitted an extension so that he could actually manipulate, and the other thing is that the landing gear is supposedly foolproof. Let's say it's 99% foolproof. It's got a geometric lock in the undercarriage. It's also got a mechanical spade. It's about like a chisel shape, but it's about 150 mil longer, and it's about this wide, and it's about a quarter of an inch thick, and it's attached to a cable on the undercarriage downlock latch lever, which is a physical lever on the floor, which draws that spade, which is up behind the trunnion. The pointed end of it comes over the trunnion, so the gear physically cannot retract unless that spade, the latch lever, is pulled up and that spade comes up out of the way. Then the lever comes right up to about a 45-degree position, and then the undercarriage lever, which is the next one down, comes up, hydraulic pressure. The gear comes up, and when the red lights go out, that lever, the undercarriage landing lever, is moved positively to the neutral position. You can't pussyfoot with it, so you can't, it's not an old lady's action. You've got to be positive, down to neutral, and that sets then the undercarriage landing lock latch back down to about this angle. So unless that sequence happens, the next time you put the undercarriage down and the latch isn't out of the way, the trunnion will come past and ping, snap the end off it. So there's a little term I use when we're training the guys is latch first, latch last. Simple as that. So if you're going to do anything with the undercarriage, the latch is the most important thing, which is this handle that's on the floor, and it's got a little catch over it. So when it's sitting, nobody's in the aircraft, there's a spring-loaded flip catch over the front of the lever. It's got a circular groove in it that this latch fits into, the catch. If you stand on it, the kids stand on it, the spring, because it's spring-loaded, the latch can unhook. But there's no harm done as long as nobody pulls the lever up, because the spade is physically engaged over the trunnion. Clear as mud? It's bloody clever. And the other thing is, with the undercarriage, the nacelle was designed that in the event of a wheels up landing, the airplane could be left undamaged. You could actually land the airplane with the wheels up. Bloody clever, eh? If you have a look at it when it's flying, when it goes past, the tyres are protruding below the nacelle. And if it's done as best it can be done, nothing will be damaged. The prop won't touch the ground, either. You won't get a prop strike. So it's got some ingenious bits to it, and most of all, the aeroplane, if it was rebuilt today, would be about a third of the weight. It was over-engineered to buggery. And I mean, as an ex-airframe man myself, doing lots of riveting at Whanuapai in the good old days, we would never have spaced rivets as close as the ones are on a DC3. And many of you will joke about it, you know how many rivets are in there, or have you ever counted the rivets? I'm not going to even hazard a guess, but like I say, if it was rebuilt today, it'd be about a third of the weight, and would improve its performance enormously, of course. And you'll understand with the aeroplane being modified as well into the turboprop conversion, that they had to make some major mods to the fuselage. They put a 40-inch plug-in forward of the wing, and there's some mods on the wing too, of course, with the PT6. It's not a very nice looking aeroplane if you look at it from behind, because it's got these big flat slabs behind the engine nacelle, which don't really look aerodynamic, but it's got PT6 in it. And inside, Jesse and I have been fortunate enough to have a peek inside one of the really nice ones at Basler in Wisconsin. The overhead panel is like, not unlike a Boeing. It's all electronic. Switch, green lines, red lines, don't touch, put this one up, put that one down type thing. And it's all very intuitive. So the good old days of saying, what the hell is that thing doing up there? And I mean, just about every DC3 we've looked at has had a different C-47 has got different overhead panels. There was no similarity amongst many of them. You know, the mag switches are all different, where they are, where the radios are, what's on the instrument panel. It's amazing. And in the United States, especially the guys operating on Part 91 with their own private aeroplanes, I'm staggered. They've actually cut a lot of the bulkhead out behind them. So how can you do that? Oh, it's private op, we can do what we like. Not in New Zealand. You know, it's a major undertaking to do anything on this airplane, even to change a landing light. Needs a TD. Don't tell anybody I get up on the wing and do it myself. So there we are, folks. It's, yeah, definitely Corona o'clock now.